we begin with the story of the day, and that would be Boeing shares taking off after the company announced it expects to resume deliveries of the 737 MAX as early as next month, and that airlines could be able to restart commercial flights in January. Let's get to Phil LeBeau with all the details on this. Phil.
That was a heck of a move by Boeing shares today, Melissa, and it all comes down to whether or not you buy into the latest timeline that Boeing is putting out. And here's what it stands at. Right now, the company says that it expects to have a certification flight probably by early next month. Could happen late this month, but you have that certification flight. That leads to the FAA certifying the plane by mid-December. Then that frees them to begin deliveries. So that's the first part. They could start delivering planes perhaps by the end of the year to some customers. Theoretically, at the same time, pilot training rules will be set and they'll be locked in by perhaps mid-January. So if you are an airline and you've got the pilots trained and you've got the fixed aircraft, commercial flights theoretically could begin by the end of January. Don't forget that Boeing reports its October orders and delivery numbers tomorrow. The big focus will be on the 737 MAX backlog. Did we see any cancellations or conversions from MAX planes into other aircraft? And when you're looking at the airlines right now, remember that American, we talked about this on Friday, it's pulled the MAX from its schedule back to March 5th. That's when it comes back. And Southwest is not going to start flying, Melissa, until March 7th. So even though Boeing says theoretically airlines may be able to resume commercial service by the end of January, let's be realistic here. If the FAA is the first one to certify, you're looking at the 3 U.S. carriers, and yeah, other regulators will quickly follow on. But are the airlines going to be ready with the pilot training? And at least when it comes to Southwest and American, they're saying, look, you got a long ways to go before you put these planes back into true commercial service.
There's also the issue, Phil, I believe, of airlines wanting to do their own sort of PR flights, which could actually delay the process as well. And then you have to wonder if the airlines are already pushing back returning the 737 MAX to, say, the March timeframe, which is what many airlines are at right now. Right. Is there a disconnect? Is there a credibility issue on the part of Boeing when it comes to Boeing's guidance for these airlines? The airlines are saying, you know what, we're going to just take a couple more months here.
I think the airlines, Melissa, and you and I have talked about this, they realize that it's one thing for a plane to be technically cleared to fly. It's another thing to sell flights for the 737 MAX. It's going to be a challenge for every carrier around the world. And yes, I know everyone will say, well, look, eventually you mark the price down enough, you're going to get enough people to go on these planes. You have some safety or no safety issues, I should say. People will eventually forget about this. That still doesn't ease the minds of the airline executives who are planning for returning these planes into service. I mean, they don't want to be putting these planes into service and they're half full. And then the other question becomes, do you knock the price down so much that people are like, oh, geez, how much confidence do you have in this plane if you're offering a $39 fare to fly across the country? So these are, it's the balancing act that the airlines are running into right now, and that's different than what Boeing is saying, which is, look, we are responsible for getting it certified and delivered. How long it takes for you to get it back into service is not something that's within our control.
All right, Phil, thank you. Phil LeBeau in Chicago for us. So take a look at that chart of Boeing shares, right? Not too bad, Guy.
No, great day. It's probably the best day it's had since early summer. So it was a great day for Boeing. But listen, we've seen moves like this before. You go back to August when this stock was trading around 325, seemingly in a death spiral down to 300. And then you had the huge run back up to 375, 380. And I think that's what we're in the midst of now. 325 held. We talked about getting back to levels that it troughed at back in March when this all started. And that's where we are right now. The stock traded 3 times normal volume. Listen, if you believe that the bad news is done, then this stock is a screaming buy. I don't. You also, by the way, have to believe that the stock market's going to trade sideways or unabated higher still. So right now, I think you're saying that if you're buying Boeing at these levels, given today, you're saying that bad news is already priced in. I don't believe it. And the stock market will continue to go higher unabated. I don't believe that either.
I mean, what's happened in the past month? I mean, a lot has happened in the past month for Boeing at a time when the stock has gone higher. Muhlenberg survived the hill. Calhoun stepped in as chairman of Boeing, the separated chairman and CEO. Muhlenberg said that he's going to take basically no compensation, and the timeline got a little bit more firmed up. And in the process, the stock has gone higher.
Right. And so we've been in this range, 320 to 380, let's call it. We're bouncing towards the top of it. So I would say for now, a lot of this kind of good news is priced in. I think you have a couple issues. To me, there's some risks in the near term. If they miss that December date, then their credibility is shot again, and then the stock will fall. The second part, as we've all talked about, is how do you get passengers on this plane? That's a little further down the line. But I think you have a real credibility issue in the short term. If they if they don't get the certification, then there's a huge problem. But even if they push that back, I think Muhlenberg has a real problem with his credibility, and that will hurt the stock price, particularly that it's close to the top of the range. You're going to have sellers come in.
I think that's a really good point. I think the CEO has one misexecution and he's gone. I mean, that's really what happens here. And then you have this thing is like they're going to promote somebody who is also a 30-year veteran of this company. I think over the last year, we've had a really interesting debate on this desk about this stock in particular. A lot of people have felt like there's a lot of other stocks out there without all this hair on it. And then there's the one I think Tim usually is like, listen, when they get back, earnings are expected to be down 93% this year, and they're supposed to go up dramatically next year to get back to peak earnings. Sales are expected to be down 20% this year, but up 50% next year. So if you think that they can get through all that, they can get through all the PR stuff, and then it's back to Guy's point, then it's a screaming buy trading at 17 times with a backlog of hundreds and hundreds of planes getting back to making 52 of them a month.
But there's a lot of assumptions there, too, in terms of credibility and whether or not airlines believe Boeing anymore.
Right. Well, there's not just whether or not they believe them, it's how much can they extract from them from the delays that the 737 MAX is causing. Right. Discounts or lost revenue or I don't know what. It all sort of probably gets negotiated together. The thing, though, I think the stock has stopped going down on bad news. It's up a lot recently, but the market's up a lot recently, and the China situation has abated somewhat recently. Those are obviously two issues that Boeing was, correlated very highly to. So I actually think the risk reward, I don't own it. I just, it's just too rich for me. I don't own it. One thing, though, I think they really do need to consider is whether or not they need to change the name from 737 MAX and have a total rebranding.
Calhoun said we're not considering that at this time.
Yeah.
They should. Well, they,
I think
they should. They should.
They should. I mean, I know what I'm going to do when I book a flight. What kind of plane is on there? And I'm going to say I'm not getting on one of these things for a year at least.
If they change the name, you're going to know that they changed the name to that.
I know, but I'm smarter than the average bear. Come on.
You flagged this article. It was an interview in the New York Times with Doug Parker, the CEO of American Airlines, and this brings up a good point. He basically was saying that the FAA has laid out all these conditions, and it's the manufacturer either setting too aggressive a view as to when they'll have the conditions met or not being able to deliver on what they said they're going to deliver. And American Airlines uniquely, I spoke to an analyst this afternoon in Power Lunch, uniquely is in a position where it is equipped to actually flip to Airbus if it wants to, because it does have Airbus in its fleet. And so it is capable, maintenance-wise and all that, to switch to the Airbus as opposed to continuing taking Boeings.
Oh, I didn't. When I read that article, it was interesting to me. It was a little more contentious than I would have thought when they're trying to negotiate, obviously, a big deal and big payments. And, I was certainly wondering, is this December date, was that something to do with recognition of revenue? And I think you were saying on it earlier on Power Lunch today, they don't believe that, well, I guess that wasn't the reason for it. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, but it's all part of a global negotiation for what are they going to do for these airlines that have either bet their future, like a Southwest, or bet part of their future, like an American. What are they going to do for them? Once there's some clarity on that, I think the market will digest whatever that penalty is. But all that having been said, I'm not long.
Airlines didn't trade particularly well today in light of that. I think that's probably your point to a certain extent. I mean, American Airlines, if you look over the last year and a half, 2 years, probably been cut in half. Yes, we've had a bounce off a recent low, but the stock hasn't traded particularly well. I think now you're looking for names that might have been adversely affected when this happened. And a name like SPR, for example, Spirit Aerospace, which makes 70% of Boeing's planes out of Kansas. I mean, that stock's had a huge run. But you know what? Valuation-wise, it's compelling. And maybe now, at least for them, with this headline risk out of the way, maybe that's a stock that can get back to that 100 level that we saw basically in March of earlier this year.
So, Mel, you know some of the old-timey guys in the stock market, like Guy, they're into that the Dow transport, the theory, that sort of thing. Interesting to note. I mean, listen, Boeing is still up 13, 14% on the year. It's not been a massive drag if you think on any major industry. It's obviously a big component, within the IYT, and that still has not confirmed any of the new highs in the S&P 500, which I think is pretty interesting in a way. I think the IYT made a high at like 209 or something like that. So it's below 200. It's kind of threatening a little bit of a breakout. But to me, that's one that would be really interesting to see that get going, and it hasn't gotten going yet.
Well, the IYT is also, there's a couple different components in there. Remember, we had rails that actually did fairly well. So, but if we're just sticking with the airline space or aerospace in general, the one element that everybody likes about Boeing is the defense sector. So for me, I'd much rather go to a Lockheed Martin to be able to play that theme rather than a Boeing with all the hair on it.